Welcome.
Thank you.
A week ago in that seat, Sir Keir Starmer said that Labour was not a rejoined party. Is that the same for the Liberal Democrats?
Yes, we're not a rejoined party, but we are a very pro-European party. We believe it's in the interest of British people, for jobs, small businesses exporting, Scottish fishermen, for our security, for our police services, that we have the closest possible relationship with our European partners. And we'll be arguing throughout the next few months and years that Britain needs to have a far more pro-European position.
Sir Keir also said that he wasn't in favour of reopening the issue of free movement with the EU. Are you?
Yes, I think we should do. Free movement is a huge freedom for British people. British people work across the European Union. They travel, they live, they bring up families across the European Union. It's a huge freedom for our young people. And I think one of the sadnesses of taking away free movement is very illiberal. It's taking away that freedom from all our British people.
So this is part of the agreement that's spent years in the making. If you had influence in a future government, you would try and unpick some of that agreement to allow free movement back.
Well, first of all, the agreement still has to have a lot of negotiations. It's not complete. I think people don't recognise that.
There's going to be... That bit's complete, isn't it?
Well, there's weeks and months and years of more negotiation on the EU trade deal.
On things like movement.
Well, not on free movement. That's true. So I'm saying that I want to influence now the negotiations so we have a much closer relationship with our European partners, because that's just so important for British jobs and British security. But in due course, I do think we need to negotiate a much better deal. It's why the Liberal Democrats voted against the EU trade deal, because it was so bad for our country.
Last time we were talking, you said that you were sympathetic to the idea of students getting some of their money back because their education had been so disrupted. There is now a great argument going on about who should pay for that kind of thing. Should it be the government, or should it be the universities? What's your answer?
I think it should be the government. I think the government has really let down universities, has let down schools, frankly. I mean, the fiasco from Gavin Williamson, the way he's mismanaged this whole crisis for our children and young people and students, that's why I've called for him to resign. I think he's the worst education secretary we've had in living memory.
But the government can't pay for everything. I mean, debt is at a huge level at the moment. If they're going to pay all the student fees and all the loans off and so forth, that's another massive debt on government. You can't just constantly call on the government to pay for everything.
No, of course not. But the government, during a pandemic, has rightly stepped in. We've supported the evidence and the action they've taken to support industry, support vulnerable people. And I don't think you should exclude students from that special support. Indeed, I actually would argue that the government haven't done enough for our schools. I think they should be funding them better. I also think they've not done enough for our economy, particularly for small business and all the 3 million people who've been excluded from support.
There were two great issues that seem to influence Liberal Democrat voters historically. One was Europe, we've talked about. The other one is the environment. There is going to have to be a huge process of national rebuilding after the pandemic. How do you see that affecting our environmental credentials? What should be done?
Well, I've called for a 150 billion green economic recovery plan over 3 years. That's the sort of size we need, both to deal with our economic problems, creating those jobs, those opportunities in the new green industries of the future. But it's also important to tackle climate change. This is an emergency. And I'm afraid the government's response has been weak and timid. They've talked about a £4 billion plan. We need a £150 billion plan.
So we're in the middle of the eye of the storm of this terribly dangerous pandemic. Do you think parties should be leafleting door to door during this?
Yes, as long as it's compliant. If it's compliant with the guidance, absolutely. The guidance is clear.
I'm not sure it is compliant with the guidance. The guidance is stay at home unless it's really necessary. Wandering from door to door to door, giving people Lib Dem leaflets is not hardly a national priority. With respect.
Well, with respect, the guidance says there's an exemption for volunteer organisations. We've taken legal advice of that, and the advice we've given to all our councillors and volunteers is they need to wear a mask, they need to socially distance, they need to sanitise their hands. We're taking all the sorts of precautions that Amazon takes, that Royal Mail takes. And I'll tell you why it's so important that we do reach out to communities. Liberal Democrat councillors and community activists have always been a key part of helping people. At the beginning of the pandemic, I set up the Liberal Democrat Community COVID Task Force to encourage people to phone people who were isolated, to encourage them to volunteer.
Going door to door is something very different. Both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party have said this is not appropriate at the moment. The Lib Dems carry on doing it. Couldn't you tell people word was stop.
It's interesting you say that about the Conservative and Labour Party. They are delivering leaflets too. We've got leaflets from Conservative activists, leaflets from Labour activists that have been delivered in very recent days. So I'm afraid the Conservative and Labour Party need to get their own house in order. And I believe that as long as you're helping community, you're giving people advice, telling them where they can get tested, where they can find the latest government advice, that is the sort of thing that actually, if you're trying to help local people, you should be doing.
All right, Sir Ed Davey, the Liberal Democrats, thanks very much indeed for coming in and talking to us.